Hello, and welcome to Split Your Head. I'm your host, Bob, and today's special guest is Samm Deighan, an author, film historian, and special features content producer over at Vinegar Syndrome, which means that you can hear her walk you through the cartoonish depravity of the infamous Cat 3 film, The Ebola Syndrome, with her commentary track, amongst many other amazing titles that she provides commentaries for. So, in between her prolific writing gigs, podcasting for Eros plus Massacre, and amongst a zillion other fascinating things I wish we could list, she's finally unveiled a long gestating passion project in the form of this amazing new book, Revolutions in 35mm, a collection of essays all focused on the, quote, political violence and resistance in cinema from the art house to the grindhouse. So, Samm, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good, a little tired, which is just my current state with all of the projects that I'm working on, but good. And thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, you are very busy. I tried doing a lot of research leading into this to kind of get like a good list of everything, and it was like not only was there so much to find, but there was also it's not all in one place necessarily. You know, like I know you've done commentaries for haunted Turkish bathhouse. You know, on top of like the stuff for Vinegar Syndrome, but it's like I can't find a list of like every commentary all in a row.
So I actually do have a list on my Patreon. It's a free post, so you should be able to see it on there. But yeah, it's to the point now where I've worked on well over 200 releases. So it got to a point where people kept asking me like, do you have a list? And so I finally had to make one, and it took so long.
I can imagine. Yeah. What was the first one that you did?
My very first commentary. So my first couple commentaries I did with Kat Ellinger. I think our first one was Story of Sin, the Borowczyk film for Arrow.
Oh,
I think
cool.
that was first.
And then you eventually got into like a more permanent role of doing this for Vinegar Syndrome.
So what I do for Vinegar Syndrome is a combination. Pretty much everyone who works there wears like 5 different hats.
Oh, okay.
So I create special features, like I do commentaries and video essays, but I also do. So the actual title special features producer, what that usually means is that the person is commissioning special features. They're not, it doesn't usually, like if that's someone's title, it rarely means they're making the special features themselves. I think I'm kind of a rare exception to that. And so part of what I do is commissioning special features from other people and doing things like editing other people's video essays and, you know, copy editing people's written essays and things like that. A lot of behind the scenes stuff.
Okay. That sounds like it takes up so much time. So then how do you find time to put out this massive book?
Well, that's why I'm tired. There's not a lot of sleeping involved.
So you were like, do I sleep for 1 hour or do I do Bob's podcast for 1 hour? And for that, I appreciate the choice.
Well, you know, I'll sleep when I'm dead.
I love that attitude. I love that attitude. But you mentioned to me when we were talking about setting this up, how you've had this book in the works for a really long time. I believe you punctuated it with crying emojis. So run me through like the history of this then, because it seems like it's been gestating for a long time.
So I am a person who is very kind of project motivated. So I usually have a lot of things floating around in my brain that I want to work on or that I'm in the process of working on, especially books, because they're the most time consuming. And this is a book that I have known that I wanted to do for probably 7 or 8 years now. And I initially thought of it as a solo book, like that I would write myself. But I think it turned out so much better with the involvement of, there's about a dozen other writers who each wrote individual essays. And I co-edited the book with this great Australian writer, Andrew Nett. And so he and I would say, wrote about half the book between us. and then we commissioned essays from other people. And I think just having so many different voices makes so much more sense for a project like this.
Absolutely, I would agree. I think it really strengthens the idea of community,
Yes.
within like political resistance, like we need to kind of band together. And it also seems like it would be impossible for one person to do something on this kind of global scale, because you've got
Yeah.
chapters dealing with like so many different countries around the world, so how did like what was the process of like getting all these different writers involved in?
So initially, I don't even remember how or why we started talking about this, but Andrew and I have known each other for years. And I sort of floated the idea to him and said, I kind of want to do this book. Do you think, because he also has a very political background and has worked with PM Press before. PM Press is our publisher. They're a small leftist anarchist press, and they'd never done any film books before this one, but he worked with them on some really cool kind of radical leftist pop culture books. Like he has one that he edited that's on radical science fiction and like science fiction novels from the 60s and 70s. It's a beautiful book. He did another one on fiction devoted to like bikers and teen rebellion in pulp novels. And so it seemed like kind of an at least worth asking PM Press if they would want to do a book like this. And they immediately said yes. They've been so great. They really pushed us to include a lot of color imagery, which publishers usually do not because it's expensive. Like anytime you see a book with a lot of images and most of them are in color, it's an expensive book to print. Like the other film books that I've done, I did this book on Jean Roland with Spectacular Optical, which was run by Kayla Janice. I'm not sure if she's still doing it, but they put out a couple books, and it was a similar thing where it just is a more expensive book to print because of how gorgeous and in color it is. Usually that's why film books are just, the images are black and white. They look kind of blurry sometimes. It's so
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was nice to have them recognize that so much of the visual aspect of this is a really important part of the book, like the poster art and stills and things like that. But once Andrew said, I think PM would be interested, he said, I would co edit it with you. And I was like, okay, let's do it. And
Nice.
we basically wrote up a list of dream topics like films and filmmakers and tried to have it cover as many different countries as possible. And narrowing it down was a challenge, but again, when you work with a publisher, you usually have a word count, and if you go over the word count, it can be very expensive for them, so they tend to frown on that. So that I think was helpful because it gave us a little bit of a limit, like knowing that we have a set number of chapters we can do. It's like you hate to exclude certain things, but it kind of makes it easier having some parameters, if that makes sense.
Sure. But I also feel too like, if this does well, a volume two would be great as well, like you can maybe
Yeah.
include all those other chapters and countries you had in mind.
Yeah, and one of the things, and this is something that I feel like I keep bringing up and will continue to bring up. One of the things that really frustrated me is we weren't able to find any Palestinian films to include, and
Oh, okay.
there are reasons for that. So we didn't write about any documentaries. We stuck to fiction films. We also kept it to the decades of the Cold War for a lot of different reasons. And so with Palestinian films, most of the ones to depict any kind of political violence, which arguably is every single every single Palestinian film, uh,
Yeah.
most of them were either confiscated or destroyed by the Israeli army. So it's like
Wow.
I'm sure there are some surviving films out there, And maybe if we do a volume two, we can find a Palestinian cinema expert to kind of help us root through that. But with some of these countries, it was a real challenge to locate films because of the way their governments are structured and things like censorship. So,
Yeah. I also think, though, that maybe it's possible the Palestinian films might be discovered more now. Like there might be people pushing for these films to be made outside of Palestine, and that maybe that could
yeah.
be something included in the volume two. But I don't know if then maybe volume two is going to be like 1992 present or something. Who
Yeah,
knows?
I don't know. So, I don't think I would personally want to do that just because
Sure.
I don't think films like there's so much that we had to exclude from those Cold War decades that I would kind of want to get through that before moving on to more contemporary years. And I have to admit, I don't love a lot of post 2000 cinema unless it's coming from East
Yeah.
Asia, which is my general kind of area of exception. Like, it doesn't excite me in
Interesting.
the same way.
Yeah, it's funny. That was one of the questions I wanted to write down to ask you because I had a feeling you were one of those many, many people I encountered that are kind of like that just prefer film from before 2000. And I mean, I'd be inclined to agree. So many of my best friends are kind of the same way, but I'm just such an optimist, like I have to find those people now that are making stuff I'm excited about and like try to champion them. But I totally get it.
Sure.
Yeah, I think
No, and
something changed.
well, a lot of things change, and I think you could point to some specific things, but particularly in the context of political violence in leftist cinema, it
Mm,
doesn't exist in the way that it did in the 70s and 80s. And
okay.
so for me, when you think about, and I know that we're going to talk about this a little later in the episode, but when you think about something like the Japanese New Wave, New German cinema, when you have these directors who are actively involved with leftist radical movements, protest movements, who are making films that reflect those movements, the example that springs to mind is somebody like Boots Riley, but
Oh yeah, yeah.
outside of him, there are not a lot of people actively involved in radical political groups who are making films now. Like, so
Yeah.
I don't even know if you could, like, yes, you could certainly stretch the definition of political violence, which you could argue that we did a little bit with things like the rape revenge chapter in the book, but I don't even know if you could get a whole book of films from the decades after the Cold War ended.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that comes to mind immediately, in response to that is probably just a budgetary thing. I don't because the companies that helped out the new wave directors, wasn't that the ATG? Was that the company?
Art Theater Guild, yeah. And I think it's partly budgetary, but I think it partly has to do with the ways in which people are engaged with radical politics now versus then.
Sure, sure. I mean, it seems now like people are more focused on documentaries, I think, to get out the
Yes.
the message that they're putting out there. You don't really see a lot of fictional films that kind of do make a metaphor out of what the message is or anything like that. I mean, I'm sure it does exist out there, and it's weird. Like the film that came to mind when you first started talking about this was it How to Blow Up a Pipeline? Did you see that one?
I have not yet, but I really want to. It's often a challenge for me to find time to watch things that aren't for work. So,
Totally. I totally
but
get that. Yeah.
also I think I guess we should say for anyone who's listening who doesn't know anything about the book, our parameters were 1955 to early 1990, 1991. So basically starting from the Algerian War and going to the end of the Cold War. No documentaries, no mainstream films unless they're mentioned in passing. So it
Okay.
covers independent cinema. It covers what we would consider art house. Like, I wrote an essay about Jean-Luc Godard, and he certainly fits in with something like that. So did the Japanese New Wave. So even if you have people who are receiving funding in more conventional ways, they're not making films meant to target a mainstream audience. So I think Pipeline could definitely fit into a more contemporary book like that, but like, how many films are there like that? It's not a lot, as far as I've been able to tell.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And I think too, and this is one of the things that really interested me about the book is that there's a lot of cases where it isn't a direct representation of what's going on politically. Like it isn't didactic all the times. Like,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what drew me to the chapter that we were hoping to focus on here, Cruel Stories of Youth, was that a lot of the films that you featured, these Japanese New Wave films, didn't necessarily have stories focused on the political issues that were around the periphery of the film. I guess that's the way I would put it, is that it's more on the periphery, but it still seems to strike at something.
I don't know if I would agree with that, actually. I think
Hmm.
most of the films, aside from the Pinky Violence films I mentioned, which don't have too many overtly radical characters, they're more about like students revolting against oppressive, you know, school bureaucracy. But most of the films I wrote about in that chapter, the characters in the films are leftists. They're
Okay.
overtly part of radical movements. So I guess to me they are directly,
Sure, sure. Okay. I get that.
but they are more challenging films. So like, why I was interested in doing this book is because to me most mainstream kind of direct conventional explorations of radical politics in cinema is propaganda. It's not doing anything interesting. It's either, like you
Mm.
said, super didactic, which someone like Godard certainly dipped into that territory as well, where the film is just telling you how you should feel about something political, like shouting at you. Whereas I'm much more interested in these films that tell a specific narrative story that maybe has leftist characters or maybe has people engaging with political violence, like the chapter on the spaghetti westerns. They're all, you know, great entertaining spaghetti westerns, but they include stories where characters are encouraged, radicalized through different ways to pursue revolution, like, John Maria Volante telling everyone to buy dynamite and not not bread. but but I think in the
Yeah.
Japanese New Wave films, because directors like Oshima and Wakamatsu were so engaged themselves, their films usually focus on characters who are obviously leftist radicals, whether because it says so in the dialogue or because there are enough indicators that audiences at the time would have understood it to be that way. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I am, maybe I'm being nitpicky then, because like something like Cruel Story of Youth, it almost seems like something I could forget about, that there were the protests going on, because they weren't like the central part of the story, and
Sure.
the main two characters. I think I can't remember their names, but the guy was basically, I think he was friends with protesters. I don't think he was actually
Well,
a protester himself.
so the two younger teenagers who are the protagonists are
Hmm.
super jaded. They have all this dialogue about how they don't care about the world and they don't care about politics, but their two older siblings are protesters
Right, right,
who put all of this, and so there's a lot of conversation about it in the film. So even if the
right.
two younger aren't, a lot of it is about how they're kind of protesting against the protests because they're so frustrated by how ineffectual they were.
Hmm. And so, do you see the film then is basically doing the same thing? Like True Story of Youth is almost like protesting against the protests.
No, not necessarily. So to me, the reason that I specifically wanted to write a chapter about the Japanese New Wave and a chapter about New German cinema is because I often find the most interesting leftist films to be ones in which a leftist director really takes a hard look at their community. And
Mm,
so films where people are saying, "Oh yes, here's what we should all do. We need to work together to, go bomb parliament or something." I don't think to me they feel more like propaganda than a film like Cruel Story of Youth that's saying we're all unhappy, we all want things to change, but what's the right way to do that? And
mm,
I think sometimes a film that seems kind of nihilistic isn't saying there's no hope and isn't saying you shouldn't be leftist, but it's saying in order to be the best leftist you can be, you need to really interrogate this community that you belong to and its effectiveness. And that's something that Oshima returned to again and again throughout his films.
right, like Night and Fog in Japan.
Yes, which
Yeah.
is whew, a lot of a lot of those early films like Cruel Stories of Youth and like Night and Fog are interesting because they compare these different generations of young leftists. They're
Mm,
often people in their late 20s in conflict with people in their early 20s. And the people in their early 20s are usually saying, like, well, you guys got together and protested, but it didn't change anything. So why should we do that now? And I think it's a good question. And I think it's a question that people still ask is, like, how can we change things, or why should we bother to be politically active at all or do anything when it's not going to change anything? But I think that's also why it was so important to include so many different kinds of films in the book, because you have things like Battle of Algiers, which kicks off the book essentially, and a lot of the films about African liberation resistance that basically kicked colonialism out of different parts of Africa. So it's like you have these films showing that, yes, resistance is incredibly difficult and there will be a big loss in life, but you can make change happen. And so I think that that balance is so important.
mm. Right, and I think with every chapter focusing on different issues, different countries, like you're going to get so many different takes on it, and maybe
Yeah.
people disagreeing with that, and so on and so forth. I did try to watch as many movies as I could from the Cruel Stories of Youth chapter, and last night I watched Ecstasy of the Angels, which
Oh,
was kind of an interesting uh, you know, it seemed in conversation with Night and Fog in Japan to me, anyways. And I think you even say that in the book that it's sort of like the death knell to the whole period of these new wave filmmakers making films about the protests. Is that right? Did I get that right?
yeah, I feel like the way that Koji Wakamatsu is such an interesting case because he's one of the only directors that we wrote about in the book, but also possibly in cinema history, to make these kinds of radical films. And for anyone not who doesn't know his name, though I think you said you've covered him on the show before.
A few times, but yeah, if you want to talk a little bit about him, by all means.
He's so fascinating to me because his life story is just wild. Like growing up, he was in the Yakuza and from there went on to be really politically radicalized and was not only helping to kind of fund political violence, but also like went to Palestine and trained with the PLF, which is what got him banned from the United States. Like he was not allowed to enter the US. And people tried to get him in. Like I think even Oshima signed this letter saying like this man is an important artist. Please let him in for this retrospective film festival. And the State Department was like, absolutely not. So-
Wow.
and this I think was in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it wasn't
Oh,
like,
okay.
yeah, this was like not happening in the 70s. This was decades after the fact. The State Department was still like, no way.
That's
Uh,
amazing.
It is amazing. But he was one of the first directors to form his own production company to make pink films because he was working with some of the bigger studios like Nikatsu, pink films being softcore sex films. So he started this company to make these often very anti-erotic sex films, often with really challenging characters
Hmm.
and some political content, but became a big enough producer that he wound up like he and Oshima have this very kind of relationship that to me sort of comes full circle in a lot of ways, because when Oshima wanted to make In the Realm of the Senses in the late 60s, early 70s, and wanted to include actual hardcore scenes, the Japanese government was like, you can't make a film like that here. And they did make some of it there, but they also went to France for funding and they went to Wakamatsu for funding. And so to have him kind of be involved on the ground in these radical, very violent leftist political movements, but also be such an important figure in transgressive Japanese cinema, he's just endlessly interesting to me.
Yeah. And I guess it's interesting to me then how someone who is so politically inclined would then make a pink film like Violated Angels. And, I watch a film like that and I try to see how it lines up with his politics necessarily. Is that maybe just I'm looking too deep and there's nothing there and he just so happened to make this story? Or is there something that, connects to his politics in that?
I think to me, some of those really nihilistic pink films he made in the late 60s and early 70s like are more a reflection of the time than have a specific message. So part of why I love him so much, Oshima, some of the other filmmakers mentioned in the book, is because they didn't feel the need to lecture you about their politics with all of their films. And
Mm-hmm.
Wakamatsu is definitely a strong example of that, where you do see a lot of either subtly or more overtly political characters in his films. Like, I don't know if you've seen Sex Jack, but
No, no.
oh my God, Sex Jack is incredible. It's one of my
Okay.
favorites. It's this group of student radicals are hiding someone, and a lot of the film involves them sitting around waiting in apartments, and while they're waiting in these like safe houses, there's a female radical with them and they basically take turns having sex with her, and her attitude is
Okay.
kind of like, not again. but, but
Yikes.
it's I think such a good example of a lot of his different themes coming together at once. And a lot of these Japanese directors, especially from the 60s and 70s, I think used sexually transgressive themes to express their politics and definitely to express some of their social nihilism.
Okay. But and this is something I was talking to you about earlier. How I think a lot of people would view that as like very misogynistic, which seems kind of inherently not leftist. So how do you think that these leftist radicals are necessarily like speaking to misogyny with including in their films, or is there really even a way to generalize that?
Well, I think there are two answers here. I mean, we could do a whole entire podcast episode on
Yeah.
this topic alone. But off the top of my head, there are two answers here. The first answer is, when you look at the actual leftist movements in the 60s and 70s, there's a lot of inherent misogyny. And I don't think it's that these leftist movements consciously hated women. I think it's just people are a product of their society. And I think you see this with Soviet feminism and the way the role of women changes from the Russian Revolution in the 19 teens to much later under the most repressive years of Stalinism in the 50s, where as it gets more totalitarian, it becomes more misogynistic. Whereas the Soviet government started out to be one of the most feminist in the world. And I think you have a similar thing going on with these movements where the people who are involved in them might genuinely be communists and socialists who want to change things for the better, but sometimes they have trouble re envisioning gender roles. And I don't necessarily think you can expect people to just magically change their way of being socialized. Like, you can certainly become radicalized and be more feminist, but I don't think it happens overnight like someone flipping a switch. And so I think some of the misogyny that was happening was just really socially ingrained. It didn't just happen in Japan, it happened in every country. Like, you can read accounts from
Sure.
women leftists in the United States, certainly in West Germany, who were sort of expected to like stay back and clean the commune and be around if anybody wanted to have sex with them, because that was what being liberated meant. It was throwing off these bourgeois values. So we're not going to get married, and I'm not going to marry you and treat you like my property. But I think a lot of men, even now, have a hard time thinking about women differently on a fundamental level. And I think it's inevitable that that would also show up in leftist movements because people aren't perfect. But where these films and filmmakers are concerned, I don't think either Wakamatsu or Oshima were remotely misogynistic. I think they just were reflecting the way the world was. And to make a truly radical film, you need to show that it's hard for women. And I think that's what they were doing, basically. I think having someone like Oshima or even Shoei Imamura, who's working at the same time as Oshima, these are men who in the 60s are making films about the lives of women in a way that almost no filmmakers had done before, like showing what it's like to be a sex worker in a way that is not judgmental, and there's no character trying to come along and save her. And in the case of a lot of Imamura's films, for example. But with Oshima, you know there's this really interesting overlap between his use of radical politics, his use of transgressive sexuality, and the way that he again and again features these female characters who are just trying to find a different way to be in the world. But at the same time, he shows how incredibly difficult that is. So, if anything, I don't know that we could call Wakamatsu's films feminist exactly, but I don't think a film is misogynistic just because it has sexual violence in it, because there's
Oh
a lot
no,
of sexual
I don't
violence in
either.
the
It's
world.
more just
No, no, I I didn't think that that's what you were getting at, but I've definitely talked to people who just write these films off because to them it's a black and white issue. It's, if you have sexual violence in your film, you must hate women.
but I think the other point of it too, and maybe this is just sort of the issue with pink films in general, is that the sexual violence seems to be used for arousal for people, and I think a lot of people have a hard time kind of wrapping their heads around that. Whether that's even the case, I'm not sure, because as you said, Wakamatsu was sort of going for this like anti-eroticism.
Well, that's what makes the pink films so interesting, I think, is they run this wide spectrum from for on one end of the spectrum you have films that are clearly meant to titillate, to be erotic. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have Wakamatsu's films, which seem obviously not to be. Like, sex in his films is rarely sexy in any conventional sense.
Yeah,
There are also things like, I don't know if you're familiar with Director's Company.
yeah, that's they've just been getting re-released, right, by Third Window.
Yeah, so Director's Company is this kind of group of younger, more independent Japanese directors in the 80s who got together funding to make pink films, but the deal with making a pink film is that you have to have either nudity or a sex scene every, let's say, 10 minutes. But beyond that, you could do whatever the fuck you wanted. And so a lot of those directors company films are incredibly like surreal and imaginative. There's beautiful, really moving melodrama. They just threw in some sex scenes so that they could get funding and get their films made. So I don't think you can really make a generalization about pink films the way that people often think about, like,
Hmm.
US softcore Skinamax type stuff, because it's just such a different thing. And there there is a whole subset of films that they're very sadomasochistic. They're basically torture porn, but they usually involve these female characters who are kidnapped, subjected to like bondage and different kinds of sadomasochism. And by the end of the film, they're always these like willing participants. But they're, I guess you could see them as misogynistic, and certainly people do. But to me, it's like they're clearly just fantasies. And some of those female actresses involved, like Naomi Tani is a good example.
Yeah.
She's just an icon. And so
Yeah.
it's not like it's this, 19-year-old who's coerced into being into these films she doesn't want to be in. She was like a superstar and
Right.
talks
Yeah.
positively about her experiences and how she was involved in coming up with some of the story ideas and character development. And so to me, it's just always so much more complicated. Like, not that you
Hmm.
can't point to certain films and say, well, that makes me feel kind of gross, I don't want to watch that. But
Yeah.
just like speaking of the subgenre as a whole.
Right. And maybe you're supposed to feel gross as well.
Well,
Like that's kind of part of it.
yeah, I mean, if you look at, not that I think this is a conversational tangent we necessarily want to go down, but like if you look at, and this is one of my favorite things to look at every year, but when they come out with the Pornhub statistics of like who's watching
Okay.
what and what's the most
Yeah.
popular, it's like there is an audience among women for those kinds of non-consensual sadomasochistic and like
Right.
rape fantasy films. But like there's the understanding that it's a fantasy and it's not real and it's not
Yeah, of
meant to be
course.
real.
Yeah, yeah. It's cool that you mentioned Naomi Tani because I did an episode with my friend Dakota Newt a little while ago on her work, and it was amazing to go through a bunch of her films and learn about her whole career and how, as you said, like she was an advocate for herself. She got Anaruka Dan. She insisted on him working on so many of the productions and everything. So she really made her stamp, and I think she directed as well, if I'm not mistaken.
I think she did. Yeah, she
Okay.
really was just incredible. I think she's still alive. So I don't want to say she was
Yeah.
incredible. She is
Right.
still
Oh, yeah.
incredible,
Yeah.
but to have a woman in the late 60s and early 70s and certainly beyond, but to get her start in these pink films, in these very extreme content transgressive pink films, but be so in control of her image and her career and be such an enthusiastic participant, I think is really incredible.
Hmm. But she also like would very rarely go outside to ensure her skin was this, porcelain white and so soft and everything. It's like it's almost like this occupational level of sadomasochism in a way, like the things you do for your work.
Well, and I think there's also a lot there about Western European beauty standards and their effect on East Asian women, which if you look at, Japanese and Korean cosmetics and skincare is some of the best in the world, but there are so many products even now that are like make your skin whiter. It's just like so
Right.
gross.
Oh wow.
Thank you,
Okay.
colonialism.
Yeah. So the other person that I was wanting to talk to you about, because I feel like maybe he was, brought up as a possibility for this chapter, was Shuji Terayami or Terayama. Are you familiar with him at all? I might be saying his name wrong.
So Shuji Terayama.
Yeah.
So I love Terayama, but Terayama was not a candidate because he's not leftist. And everybody
Oh,
that I
really?
Yes, he talks about it pretty openly in interviews that he considered himself non-political and was very much trying to position himself as only interested in experimental art with no politics. So he exists in, and I am planning to do a Japanese cinema book sometime in the next like 2 years, and I definitely want to write about him a lot. So it's not that I'm not interested in him, it's more
Sure.
that he just didn't fit, because I think he thought of himself as being sort of between figures like Oshima to the left and then somebody like Yukio Mishima to the right, where Mishima certainly was a radical. He's just a right-wing radical. And so
Right.
Terayama kind of flirts with a little bit of both, but I thought about including something like throw away your books and rally in the streets, but
Yeah.
I already had so many films packed into this. I struggled with this chapter because once I started writing it, I realized like I should just be doing a book on Japanese cinema, because I want to go so much more into all of these than I have the like word count allowance for. So I had to
Right.
leave him out because he just didn't make sense politically.
Okay. And then this way, the book will not just be about politics. Then it'll be like Japanese cinema on a more general scale.
Well, I want to specifically write about Japanese ero girl films and the
Oh,
more
okay.
transgressive sexual films. So there will be political content in there, but it won't be only leftist directors. So that way
Oh,
I can include more people.
yes. Right, yeah, that's what I meant. Was like it's not specific to just politics. Like I'm sure
Yeah.
you can write so many chapters on politics, but then so many chapters on other kind of themes and scenes and everything. There is a more recent film that I saw a while ago that kind of fits in with the whole like radical leftist groups going to transgression. Have you seen Kichiku? I think it's Kichiku Banquet of the Beasts is the full title.
I haven't.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, definitely look that up. I think it came out like late 90s, early 2000s, which it might just be on the cusp for you. Because I know you're not a fan of
Well,
post
so
2000 work.
my exception is East Asian cinema. Like
Oh,
w-
right. Yeah.
so I feel like I have a much wider berth there.
Yeah. But I would describe it as, it's kind of along the same lines of Ecstasy of the Angels and what was the other one? Night and Fog in Japan, but it kind of veers into
Yeah.
like way more extreme horror by the end of it. And I think maybe
Okay.
Synapse put it out on DVD back in the day, but I don't think it's ever gotten a Blu-ray release.
That's something that, I mean, we're living in such a golden age of things being released on Blu-ray for home video, all these films that I never could have imagined would come out in special edition versions. But with Japanese cinema, there's so much that still needs to come out. Like it's just wild.
I know. And I think I was talking to you about this the other day about how like we're now starting to see some more pink films come out via
Yeah.
88 films. So it just seems like there's so many of those types of films specifically that maybe people will want. Who knows? It's
I
such
hope
a
so.
tricky film. Like I mean, considering you worked on the I keep forgetting the title of this. I own it. The Haunted Turkish Bathhouse.
I love Haunted Turkish Bathhouse.
Oh,
When they asked me if I wanted to work on it, I was like, "Are you kidding?"
yeah. Could I get like totally on the spot here, but like your top five like pink films?
On the spot, probably not. I'm I'm
Okay.
no, I'm so bad at just like and this is why I said, I need you to send me a list of questions, because
Yeah.
my like very hyper focused neurodivergent brain, I'm so bad at like pivoting to especially like lists like that.
Okay.
And I've been watching so many of them, especially the like late 70s, early 80s ones in the last year, that I think my brain would just stroke out if I tried to pick a top five.
Right, right. Well, it's funny because in like preparing for this, after watching Ecstasy of the Angels, I remember thinking like, oh, I kind of wish it was like Inflatable Doll of the Wastelands, and then I had to
Hmm.
like look up the review of that, and I was like, wait, I don't remember any of this happening in the film. Like I've watched so many of these movies at this point, and I'm sure you've watched way more than me, but they do start to blend together a little bit.
Well, and they all also like I do this really bad thing where if I have, let's say I have a couple days where I don't have a ton of deadlines, I'll watch a bunch of movies in a 3-4 day period. And so that makes them blend in my head a little bit more. But the Pink films also always have the most insane, amazing titles that it just,
Yeah, yeah. And then you have to kind of like remember which one as well. There's usually like two or three titles.
yes. And that's why I cannot live without Letterboxd at this point, solely because of all these Pink films I'm trying to watch.
Letterbox has been super helpful for that, but it's just a shame because they switched over from the English titles of the Pink films to I think it's like the kanji for it. So it's
Yeah.
just so hard to find, you know. And I've gotten to the point where I'll just like copy and paste the the title of it into a Google to hopefully find it. But even then, that doesn't really help.
So there is a tab where you can see alternate titles. I think it's in the it's like a more info tab or something like that. I'll have to screenshot it. But it's come in handy for me because I'm working on a Hong Kong category 3 book and those movies all have like so many fucking titles that I need to be able to see the Cantonese to make sure it's the right film. Not that I can read Cantonese. I just, you know, I've studied Mandarin a little bit, so it's like I can recognize some things and just like having a standard title is a godsend when you're writing about something.
Totally. Yeah. So let me get this straight. You're writing a Japanese cinema book,
Well, that
and
will be that will be the so right now I have a Polish cinema book I don't want to talk too much about that's almost finished. I'm just finding a
okay,
publisher. I have a category 3 book that I've talked about a little bit more publicly, so I'm fine discussing that. It's like an extreme Hong Kong cinema book. It's about halfway finished. Hopefully I'll have it finished early next year.
amazing.
And then when that's done, I have notes for my Japanese cinema book, and I really like. I wish that writing books could be my full time job, but like we don't live in a world where that's
I
possible
know.
unless I'm like unless I become a trust fund kid as an adult. If a rich person wants to adopt me,
That's the
or
dream, eh?
yeah, or unless I win the lottery or something, and I don't play the lottery,
Yeah.
so I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
No. It is kind of sad though the times we live in that like the dream for most people is to just like come from a rich lineage, you know, like just have rich parents and they'll take care of everything for you.
I think that's always been the dream.
Oh, yeah. I just try not to think of it that way because, like, you know, we all want to earn our own money doing our own thing, but, you
I don't
know.
know. I think for me, it's less about wanting to earn my. I mean, yes, of course, I want to be able to make a living, but
Yeah.
for me, I think it's more about wanting to live in a society where things are equitable and like
Yeah.
the way that things are doesn't have the horrible hell exploitation world that we're currently living in. It doesn't have anything to do with people not working hard enough. It's
No, no, not
just,
at all.
being in such an exploitative system,
Yeah.
it is much more challenging than it was even like 40, 50 years ago for people to make it work on, let's say, a middle class salary.
Yeah. And I mean, to me, that's probably why we're not seeing as many of these films that reflect this kind of milieu that we're in. But at
Oh
the same
yeah.
time, we're kind of in even more need of it. And I feel like general audiences don't even realize that necessarily. I think they're really like kind of pushed into just receiving the same type of content all the time, you
Oh
know?
yeah. Totally
So
agree.
yeah, that's like a whole other rant. to
Well, and
fill in the
that's
best.
also why we didn't want to go after 1990-ish, because the films made during the Cold War really have a relationship to each other that the films made after it don't. And
Okay.
also why we didn't want to include any mainstream films, because anytime Hollywood approaches leftism or political violence, it's always ridiculous propaganda that the
Mm,
message at the end of the day is like freedom,
right. Just like kind
which
of a
freedom
blanket
freedom
statement.
equaling capitalism.
Right. Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. I guess the idea of putting out a film to make lots and lots and lots of money is sort of hard to reconcile with the idea of capitalism. Like there needs to be a system where it's like, I don't know, the film is like crowdfunded, and you
But it
everyone.
shouldn't
Well,
have to be crowdfunded. There should be
yeah.
public funding for the arts.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I'm just thinking almost of like in terms of like people owning the film like a union, like everyone's paying into it and then they own the film. But I don't know. I mean, that's kind of already happening in a lot of ways too, with like Kickstarters and stuff. So who knows?
Sure, but like if you consider the fact that Hollywood is $1 billion industry, people shouldn't have to be crowdfunding films. Like, it's
No,
insane.
no. Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. But yeah, we are coming up to an hour here, so I don't want to keep you much longer. We do have a questionnaire to
Okay.
get you to finish things off with. But was there anything else you wanted to touch on about the book? I know you said it's available through PM Press. I hope it's okay to say this. It is available on Amazon. I did notice, but you
Yeah,
probably want
it's
people to purchase through PM Press.
sure. It's available through, I think, most of the major online book retailers. You can also, if you are a person who likes buying Blu-rays, you can find it through Diabolic DVD. I love them very much, and I'm appreciative that they're carrying it. The Vinegar Syndrome store should be carrying it soon,
Oh,
because PM Press is a smaller publisher. It from when the book is actually printed, the first people who get it are the pre-orders and the people who helped with the Kickstarter, and then it will be more readily available. So, in the next couple weeks, you should be able to find it pretty much everywhere.
okay. And then maybe people can grab it during like the Black Friday sale or something if they want to add it into their cards.
Well, so the way that books work on the Vinegar Syndrome site is usually we have a set number of them. So it's kind of, I don't think it will always permanently forever be in stock there, but I'm sure
Oh, okay.
once it is, they'll send it out in our newsletter.
Cool. Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
The questionnaire. You can take your time. You can rapid fire,
Yeah.
whatever
I
comes.
was going to say
Okay.
I'm really bad at on the spot questions. So let's just preface that.
You'll do fine. Don't worry. It's nothing
Okay.
too challenging. It's no algebra or anything. Okay. Tea or coffee?
Both?
Can you pick one?
I guess coffee, because I have some right now.
Okay. Choose one film for the rest of your life.
Absolutely not. I could never.
Maybe just like whatever comes to mind right away. Just one, and we won't hold you to it for the rest of your life, but just one now in the moment.
Okay, because we were talking about Oshima, and I brought this up earlier, In the Realm of the Senses,
Wow. Okay.
which
I would say it's his best film.
I have a little earlobe tattoo that she also has in the movie. So I am an In the Realm of the
Oh.
Senses super fan.
Oh, amazing. Okay.
So
That's
that
awesome.
makes sense.
Yeah, it's his best film. I would agree. If you had to be an animal, which would you choose?
Um, a wolf, maybe?
Oh, okay. Haven't heard that one. Usually people say cat or something very unique. So yeah, that works.
What's the most unique answer you've gotten? Has anyone said like wildebeest?
Loch Ness Monster.
Does that count as an animal?
I let it slide. I don't know. I guess
Okay,
it's
so like I could have picked a dinosaur, is what you're saying.
whatever you want. Yeah.
I'll stay with the wolf and keep things simple.
Yeah, wolf is good. Rob Jabaz picked what was it, like a squid at the very bottom of the ocean, and he went into like a very long, detailed explanation for it. So
That's
I don't
incredible.
expect anyone else to do that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. What happens when we die?
We go back to the earth.
Okay. Cool. All right. And the final question: song title that best describes your life.
I have no idea.
Well, usually when people get stumped, I just say, like, what's one of your favorite songs that feels very personal to you? And usually that kind of leads you in the right path.
Yeah, I truly don't know.
Hmm. Favorite album?
I am terrible at favorites. Like picking just one thing, even if it's like picking a favorite film, I could never in a million years actually do that. Picking a favorite album, I think, is similar. Like I just have so many.
What was
Yeah.
the
I
what
I
was
might
your the first album that you ever became like obsessed with as a kid,
hmm.
or like in high school maybe?
um I feel like for me it was kind of an explosion of things. Like, you know, I want to say the first thing I bought on tape was Motley Crue. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think I can answer this question.
Okay, could we say like a Motley Crue song? Is there one in particular that could?
No, it,
That's totally fair. I'm not a big Crue fan, so I totally
no,
respect that.
I like them, but Shout at the Devil is great, but to say that like that would be something that has a deep personal resonance to me is not accurate. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know if I can answer this.
Okay. I don't want to press you anymore, but I'll say that "Shout at the Devil" was important to you as a child, but you don't feel comfortable saying that as a song title that describes your life now.
Well, I mean, they're also I don't know if you've actually listened to the Shout at the Devil lyrics, but the
No.
like so, around the time of the Satanic Panic, which was when I grew up,
Okay.
there's this big sort of hubbub about musicians who are promoting things like violence and Satanism. And, Judas Priest gets swept up into an actual court case. And, but Shout at the Devil, which got Motley Crue involved in that, like they were just a bunch of idiots on a ton of drugs. And Shout at the Devil is this like super paranoid song about how they want to keep the devil away. So it's actually like an anti-Satan song.
Oh, okay.
not
Interesting.
not to
Okay.
spoil Shout at the Devil for anyone, but yeah, they're not
No.
shouting at him to come over. They're like, "Stay away, please. We've done too
Right.
much meth and we're too paranoid for you to for you to be here." So yes, no, a tape that I bought when I was 6 is not my answer.
No. You know what I love about that is that even though you couldn't come up with an answer, you actually gave to me a very Sam Deighan level answer, in that we got a bit of a history lesson that was actually really interesting. So it was like, even though you couldn't properly answer it, you kind of answered it exactly
Wait,
for
okay.
yourself. Oh wait,
You know
okay,
what?
okay, okay.
Maybe I can. All right.
Okay.
I had to like share a historical fact with you for my brain to kind of maybe pick something. Um okay, I'm going to go with Kate Bush
Yes.
because Hounds of Love was something I got into when I was in high school, and it was by no means the first album I was obsessed with. I got pretty into movies and music around like 10, 11. So
Okay.
it was early for me, but Let's go with her song "Waking the Witch."
Waking the Witch. That's side B, right?
It is,
Of
yes.
okay, right. Okay. I love that album.
It's
Cloud
so good.
Busting might be my favorite song off of it.
It's so
Um
good. Have you seen the video with Donald Sutherland?
I
R.I.P.
have. Yeah, it's great. It's great. I
It's so
mean,
good.
have you heard the Sensual World album? That's kind of secretly my favorite album.
That's also secretly my favorite album. It's so good.
Amazing. Yeah. It's so bombastic.
It is, and it is Sensual World. Is it that or the Red Shoes that has the Prince song?
I don't think there's a Prince song on it now. So it must be the Red
It
Shoes, which
must
I
be
don't
Red
think I've
Shoes.
heard.
I listen to them both so often that I sometimes kind of it's Red Shoes has a song co-written by Prince. Like she did this thing where she recorded the demo, sent the song to him. He added all this other stuff, sent it back to her, and I think she got sort of final say. But the first time I really paid attention to it, I was like, it's weird how much this sounds like a Prince song. And it randomly came up in conversation with my friend Bill, who runs this podcast called Supporting Characters, and he's like a Prince super fan. And he was like, well,
Okay.
it sounds like a Prince song because Prince co-wrote the song, and my brain was just like
Oh, okay. But I thought you meant like Prince sang on it, but it's just Kate Bush singing,
It's just
basically.
Kate Bush
Is that right?
singing, but yes, it's just her singing, but
Okay.
there are backing vocals that he I think might be involved in, but you can hear that like the arrangement he co-wrote, like the music sounds like a Prince song, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, for sure. He had a very distinct style and was like an incredible producer, and I
Yeah,
think made
it's
a
called
lot of
Why Do
songs
You
for
Love
people.
Me?
Why Do You Love Me? Which sounds like a Prince song, especially if
Mhm.
it's like the letter Y and then the
It's
letter
not.
U. Oh, okay. Damn it.
Yeah, I don't know if Kate Bush if British Kate Bush would have let that
Yeah,
that
that's true.
that
That's true.
lettering system fly. And to this day, I think Prince is the only person that I can tolerate writing that way. Like
Okay.
no one else is allowed to do that. I don't care if you're texting. If you're not Prince, spell out the whole
Yeah.
word.
I will say, Sam, if we're not careful, we're going to start a whole episode.
That's true.
And you did say
Sorry.
you need to wrap. No, don't apologize. Like if you were like, yeah, let's do another hour, I would totally do it. But you said you got an hour, and I respect your time. So thank you
Thank you.
so much for coming on here and talking with me. I hope we got to at least the bottom of the chapter that one of the many chapters you wrote, and it's honestly I've only read that chapter in the introduction so far. I just got the book a few days ago, so I'm looking forward to reading it all front to back now. And then all the books that you've teased as well sound phenomenal. I cannot wait to pick them up. And I mean that sincerely. Like if you just said like, fuck you, when I asked you to do this podcast episode, I would still buy these books. So yes.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no,
You're welcome.
I like I said, if I could be doing that full time, that's what not that I don't appreciate all the commentary work that I get and all the other kinds of writing work, but like these sorts of projects where I'm able to look at a director's entire filmography or a whole subgenre, that's what makes my brain the happiest, is kind of finding patterns within that sort of bigger picture. So
Totally.
hopefully I'll at least get these next 3 books out in the next 3 years, ideally.
Okay.
I
Awesome.
mean, a book a year is a little crazy, but
Totally. Most
just a little.
authors would just be like, "Oh my god, like, are you doing cocaine or something? Like, what's going on?"
I mean, I have a form of bipolar, so my brain produces its own
Oh, okay.
cocaine.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah.
You get a little bit of mania.
Yep.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
as long as I channel it into book writing, it's all good.
Totally. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Well, I'll let you go, but thank you so much, and yeah, have a
Thank
great day.
you. You too.